The late afternoon sun poured golden light over the prairie, casting long shadows across the weathered ranch. Dust swirled gently with each gust of wind, carrying the smell of dry grass and horse sweat from the corral. 4-year-old Samuel sat in the dirt outside his family's cabin, his small hands clutching a toy horse carved from a block of wood. Its edges were rough, its mane only hinted at by careful whittling, but to Samuel it was a treasure. His grandfather had shaped it for him during the long winter evenings before passing away, and the boy carried it everywhere he went. Samuel moved the toy across the ground, mimicking the sound of galloping hooves with his mouth. "Hi-yah! Hi-yah!" he cried, lost in his own world. He imagined himself a cowboy, riding into the horizon with his trusty steed. For him, the plains were not a land of hardship, but a playground where his imagination stretched as far as the sky. Not far away, in the shade of a cottonwood tree, another pair of eyes watched. A native boy, no older than Samuel, stood barefoot, his dark eyes fixed on the wooden horse. His clothes were simple, a deerskin tunic tied with a strip of leather, but his posture carried a quiet dignity. He did not move closer, perhaps unsure if he was welcome. Yet the longing in his gaze was clear, even to a child as young as Samuel. Samuel looked up and noticed him. At first there was only curiosity. He had seen native people before, riding past the ranch or gathering near the river, but never one his own size. Samuel paused, clutching his horse tightly, uncertain what to do. His father had often spoken of the natives with caution, telling Samuel to keep his distance. But his mother, with her gentle voice, had reminded him that kindness was never wasted. For a moment, silence stretched between the two boys. The native child did not step forward, nor did he speak. He only watched, his eyes wide and searching, as though he had been invited into Samuel's game without words. Then, with the easy generosity of a child who had never learned fear, Samuel held up his toy horse. He smiled, his cheeks dimpling, and waved for the boy to come closer. "You want to play?" he asked, his voice carrying across the dusty air. The native boy hesitated. His small hands twitched at his sides and his feet shifted nervously in the dirt. Still, the warmth in Samuel's face was too much to resist. Slowly, he stepped out from the shade and approached, each stride careful, as if crossing an invisible line between two worlds. When he stood before Samuel, he said nothing. His words belonged to a tongue Samuel did not know, yet his eyes said everything. They lit up when Samuel pushed the horse toward him. "This is my horse," Samuel explained proudly, holding it up between them. "His name's Thunder." Then, without another thought, he placed the toy into the boy's hands. The native child gasped softly, his fingers tracing the rough grooves in the wood as if it were made of gold. His lips curved into a smile so wide and genuine that it struck Samuel's heart with joy. In that instant, the two boys needed no common language. The gift spoke for them. Samuel clapped his hands and laughed, delighted at the other boy's happiness. He picked up a small stick from the ground and pretended it was another horse, galloping it alongside Thunder. The native boy caught on immediately, mimicking the sound of hooves, and soon the air was filled with laughter, the pure, unguarded laughter of children discovering friendship. From the doorway of the cabin, Samuel's mother watched quietly, her hand pressed over her chest. Her husband, the rancher, stepped beside her, his brow furrowed with unease. He whispered, "He gave away the horse his father made him." His tone was worried, almost scolding, but his wife shook her head gently. "No," she said softly, her eyes never leaving the two boys in the dust. "He gave something greater. He shared his heart." And so, in that moment, beneath the setting sun, a small boy's act of kindness bridged a gap wider than the prairie itself. What began as a toy carved from love became a symbol of something far greater. the spark of understanding between two children, born not from words or tradition, but from the innocence of giving. Samuel did not yet know that the elders of the native boy's people had seen everything from a distance. He did not know that his toy horse would carry far more weight than he could imagine. To him, it was simple. He had made a new friend. But to the watching world, that single act of kindness was about to ripple outward and change everything. The evening air grew cooler as the prairie swallowed the last of the day's light. The two boys sat cross-legged in the dust, their toy horse and makeshift stick steeds racing across invisible fields of imagination. Though they came from different worlds, their laughter sounded the same, light, unguarded, and full of life. Samuel's cheeks were streaked with dirt, but he hardly noticed. He was busy showing his new friend how to build a corral from rocks and twigs. Carefully, he placed them in a circle, patting the ground as if to say, "Here, this is where thunder sleeps." The native boy watched closely, then leaned down to add, his own small stones, his dark hair falling into his face as he worked. Together, they built a little pen for their shared horses. "Thunder goes here," Samuel announced proudly, pointing to the wooden horse. Then he looked at the stick the native boy had been using and tapped it with his finger. "That one's yours. You gotta name him." The native child tilted his head, eyes flickering with thought. Then, in his own tongue, he whispered a word, soft, flowing, like wind across the plains. Samuel didn't understand it, but he grinned anyway, nodding as if he did. "Good name," he said with certainty. The boy laughed, the sound carrying a melody that made Samuel laugh too, even without knowing why. There was no barrier in their play. When Samuel crawled on his hands and knees pretending to ride, the native boy copied him, both boys neighing and racing across the dirt yard. When Samuel tossed a pebble into the distance, pretending it was a stampede to chase, the other boy followed suit, their small arms swinging wildly as they ran. At one point, Samuel slipped and tumbled onto his side, dust puffing up around him. For a moment, silence fell. Then the native boy bent down, offering his hand. Samuel blinked, then grinned as he took it. The boy pulled him to his feet with surprising strength for someone so small. Samuel brushed himself off and said, "Thanks, partner." The words meant little to his friend, but the tone, warm, grateful, trusting, spoke louder than any language. From the porch, Samuel's mother smiled faintly, her heart swelling at the sight. She whispered to her husband, "Look at them. They don't see difference, only friendship." The rancher frowned, rubbing his beard. His eyes remained cautious, but deep inside, even he could not deny the innocence of the scene before him. Children, he thought, were untouched by the bitterness that so often poisoned adults. As twilight deepened, the two boys continued their play, now quieter, more thoughtful. The native child pointed toward the horizon where the first stars began to shine. He made a gesture with his hands, galloping hooves running across the sky. Samuel followed his gaze, squinting upward, and nodded. "Yeah," he said softly, "horses in the stars." It struck Samuel's mother then, though they could not speak the same words. The boys understood one another. Children had a way of bridging gaps that adults could not. Where men built fences and borders, children built games and laughter. The play ended only when Samuel's mother called him inside for supper. "Samuel," she said gently, "it's time to eat." The boy pouted, not wanting the fun to end. He turned to his new friend, holding out the toy horse one last time. "You keep Thunder," he said firmly. "I'll see you tomorrow." The native child's eyes widened. He clutched the horse to his chest, nodding with gratitude so deep it silenced him. Samuel gave a final wave before running inside, his boots thudding across the porch. The native boy lingered for a moment in the growing dark. He looked at the horse in his hands, then back at the cabin, where the warm glow of lamplight spilled from the windows. A smile tugged at his lips as he turned and ran toward the cottonwood grove, thunder bouncing against his chest. That night, in his family's lodge, he showed the horse to his parents. His mother traced the wooden curves with reverent fingers, her eyes misting. His father listened silently as the boy tried to explain, through gestures and bursts of laughter, how his new friend had given him the toy. When the elders later heard of it, they grew quiet, exchanging glances heavy with meaning. Meanwhile, in the little ranch cabin, Samuel lay in bed, his eyes heavy but his heart light. He thought of the boy's laughter, of the stars like running, horses across the sky. He whispered to himself, "I got a new friend," before drifting into dreams. Neither child knew it yet, but that day's laughter and sharing had set something in motion. What began as play had grown into a bond strong enough to catch the attention of those far older, far wiser, and far more watchful. The prairie was quiet after supper, the kind of stillness that settled in when the wind died and the crickets began their evening chorus. Inside the cabin, the warm light of the oil lamp flickered across the wooden walls, casting long shadows that danced with each movement. Samuel was already asleep, curled beneath a wool blanket, his cheeks still dust-streaked from the day's play. His toy horse, no longer in his possession, was not at his bedside for the first time since his grandfather had carved it. His father, Thomas, sat at the rough-hewn table, nursing a tin cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. His gaze was fixed on the window, though his thoughts were far beyond the dark prairie. He replayed the afternoon in his mind, the sight of his only son handing away a treasure, and not just to any child, but to the child of a people he had been taught to treat with suspicion. Thomas's jaw tightened. He had grown up with stories of raids, of stolen cattle, of settlers caught unprepared. Though he had never personally seen violence from the native tribes nearby, he carried the caution that every frontiersman did, a caution woven into survival. To give a gift, to build trust, was dangerous in his eyes. Trust made a man vulnerable, and, yet, his mind turned to the sound of his son's laughter, bright and unburdened, mingling with the laughter of the native boy. The two had needed no words, no explanations. They had simply played. Watching them, Thomas had felt something tug at him, a memory, distant and unwelcome, of his own childhood. He remembered a simpler time before hardship had hardened him, before loss had built walls around his heart. "Thomas," came his wife's voice, gentle but firm. She moved quietly around the small kitchen, setting aside the dishes she had washed. "You're brooding." He glanced at her but said nothing. She crossed her arms, studying him the way only a wife of many years could. "You're worried about Samuel and that boy." Thomas exhaled through his nose, a sound more like a growl. "It's not wise, Mary. He doesn't understand the world yet. He doesn't know the danger in making friends so easily." Mary's expression softened. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, folding her hands. "He understands more than you think. Maybe more than we do." Thomas frowned, not liking the thought. He gave away his horse, the one Pa carved for him. That toy meant something. Mary reached across the table, her fingers brushing his rough hand. "Yes, it meant love. And Samuel chose to share that love, don't you see? That's exactly what your father would have wanted. For his carving to carry forward, not gather dust." Thomas looked down at his calloused hands, silent. The truth stung. His father had been a kind man, far gentler than he. The old man had often said that the world hardened people too quickly, and that kindness was the only thing strong enough to soften it again. Maybe Samuel had inherited more from his grandfather than just a toy. Still, Thomas could not let go of his worry. What If this leads to trouble, what if the elders take it the wrong way? A boy doesn't understand how fragile peace is. One wrong step. Mary shook her head slowly. Or one right step, she countered. You saw them, Thomas. They were happy. Truly happy. Maybe that little act will do more than all the suspicion we carry. Her words lingered in the air, soft but powerful. Thomas leaned back, staring at the rafters above. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that a child's kindness could bridge the gap between two peoples divided by fear. But he had seen too much of life to trust so easily. Later, when the lamp was extinguished and the cabin grew dark, Thomas lay awake beside his sleeping wife. Outside, the wind had returned, whispering across the plains like an unseen spirit. He listened to it and thought of his son. Samuel had given away more than a toy. He had given away innocence, and perhaps in doing so had planted something larger, something Thomas could not yet name. But with that possibility came fear, because he knew that innocence was fragile, and the world had a cruel way of breaking. What was pure? Thomas closed his eyes and prayed silently that his son's small kindness would not lead them all into trouble. The cottonwood trees at the edge of the prairie whispered with the wind, their leaves shimmering silver under the waning light. From their shade, 3 native elders watched in silence, their sharp eyes fixed on the scene unfolding near the settler's cabin. What they saw was not merely 2 children at play. It was something much deeper, something that stirred old memories and awakened hope they thought long buried. The eldest among them, Gray Elk, stood tall despite his years, his braided hair streaked with white, his face lined with the weight of 100 winters. Beside him was Red Willow, a woman whose wisdom guided the tribe as much as any chief. She leaned on her carved walking stick, her eyes narrowing not from suspicion, but from careful observation. The youngest of the 3, though still a man, well past 50, was Broken Spear, a quiet thinker whose words, when spoken, carried the weight of stone. They had come to the grove that evening to speak of hunting grounds and to watch over their people's children. Instead, they found themselves witnessing an exchange unlike any they had seen in many seasons. A wooden horse, simple, worn, but carved with care, had been placed in the hands of Little Hawk, one of their tribe's youngest. And it had not been taken, but given freely by the pale-haired settler boy. Do you see? Red Willow's voice was a whisper, but it carried to the others. The little one gives what his people guard so closely, a gift from the heart. Gray Elk nodded, slowly, his eyes never leaving the boys. It is rare. Too often these settlers take and take again. But this one gives. His voice was rough as gravel, but tinged with something softer, respect. Broken Spear folded his arms. Children do not know fear as we do. They see no boundaries. Where we see years of mistrust, they see only play. Still, he trailed off, squinting as the settler boy placed a stick beside the wooden horse, making room for his new friend's creation. Still, the heart of a child often reveals the truth of the parent. Gray Elk turned his gaze toward the cabin porch, where the settlers stood, the mother with her hand over her heart, the father watching with worry etched into his brow. Perhaps not the parent, Gray Elk murmured. Perhaps the grandfather. That carving speaks of old hands, of patience, of love passed down. Red Willow's lips curved into a faint smile. The boy carries his ancestors with him. He does not yet know it, but he honors them by sharing what was given to him. For a time, the elders simply watched as the 2 boys played, their laughter blending with the rustle of grass. Every gesture, every exchange was weighed carefully in the minds of the old ones. To outsiders, it might have seemed like nothing more than children's games. But to the tribe, symbols mattered. Gestures mattered. And this was more than play. When Little Hawk clutched the wooden horse to his chest, the elders saw more than joy. They saw a bridge forming across a chasm that had long divided their people from the settlers. A bridge built not by treaties or bargains, but by innocence. Broken Spear broke the silence first. "What shall we make of this? A child's gift is a small thing. Yet small things grow, like seeds in the earth." Gray Elk looked to the horizon, where the stars were beginning to prick through the fading light. A seed, yes. One planted by a boy too young to know what he has done. But if we water it, if we honor it, perhaps it will grow into something strong. Red Willow tapped her staff against the ground, her eyes glinting. Then we must return the gift, not with wood, but with meaning. The child must learn that kindness does not fall into the dust. It is answered. The elders exchanged glances, and in their silence, an agreement was made. They would speak to the council. They would honor the settler boy, not because he sought it, but because it was right. His act was pure, untainted by the fears of adults. It was the kind of act their people believed the spirits favored. As the boy's laughter carried across the prairie, the elders turned away, retreating into the trees with the slow, deliberate steps of those who walked not just for themselves, but for generations yet to come. That night, around the fire in the heart of the camp, their voices carried. They told of what they had seen, not merely a toy being given, but a gift of peace. The others listened, their faces illuminated by firelight, their hearts stirred by the story. The wooden horse, they decided, was more than a toy. It was a sign, and signs were never to be ignored. Night draped its blanket across the prairie, the stars scattered like diamonds upon black velvet. Within the native camp, the fire burned bright at the center, its flames snapping and crackling, casting shifting shadows upon the circle of lodges. Families gathered close, children huddled near their mothers, and hunters returned from the plains with weary steps. It was here, in the glow of the fire, that the elders carried the story of what they had witnessed. Gray Elk, tallest of the three, stood with a solemn expression. He raised his hand for silence, and the soft murmur of the people faded into stillness. His voice, low but strong, carried over the crackle of the flames. "Today we saw something rare," he began. "We saw a bridge built by two children, where men have failed to build one for many winters." At his words, some frowned, others leaned forward with interest. The settlers had always been spoken of with caution, people who came with wagons, axes, and rifles, who carved up the land without asking the spirits for permission. For many, trust was not easy, but curiosity outweighed doubt, and they listened. Red Willow stepped forward next, her walking staff tapping against the earth. Her eyes glimmered in the firelight, reflecting both wisdom and tenderness. Little Hawk was given a gift, not taken, not bargained for, given. The settler child placed his own treasure, a wooden horse, into our boy's hands. This was not a trick, not a trade. It was kindness. A ripple moved through the gathered people. Some exchanged glances, others whispered softly. A boy's toy, carved from a settler's hand, did not seem like much. Yet for those who knew the weight of symbols, it meant more than its wooden form. Broken Spear, who often chose silence over speech, finally stepped into the circle. His deep voice rolled like distant thunder. "Our children see truth more clearly than we do. They do not carry old fears. They do not divide the land with fences or hearts with suspicion. They share." He looked around the fire, his gaze firm. That horse was not just wood. It was trust, given freely. To ignore it would dishonor both boys. Little Hawk sat with his family, the wooden horse clutched tightly in his hands. His mother stroked his hair while his father listened intently to the elders. Around them, Other children peered with wide eyes, staring at the toy as if it were a sacred relic. A young hunter spoke up from the crowd. "But why honor the settler boy? Their people bring iron and fire. They take the buffalo, the rivers, the very earth beneath us." His voice was sharp, edged with anger that came from wounds not easily healed. Gray Elk nodded gravely. "You speak truth. But even fire can warm as well as burn. This child is not his people's greed. He is not their rifles. He is only a boy who gave from his heart. If we refuse to see the good in one small act, then we will never see peace at all." The fire popped, sending sparks into the night sky. The crowd murmured again, softer now. Mothers whispered to their children, reminding them of the old teachings, that every gift carries a spirit, and that gifts must be answered. Red Willow lifted her staff and spoke firmly. "The spirits watch us always. They see when we take, they see when we give. Tonight, they saw a boy share what he loved most. If we honor that act, we honor the spirits as well." The murmurs turned to nods, voices agreeing. The story of the wooden horse spread quickly, from mouth to mouth, carried into every ear around the fire. Some spoke of it with wonder, others with cautious hope, but none dismissed it outright. Little Hawk's father rose to his feet, his eyes shining. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder and looked to the elders. "If this child's heart is pure, then we must meet it with our own purity. Let us not be smaller than a 4-year-old boy." The words struck deeply, and the people murmured their approval. At last, Gray Elk raised his hand once more. "Then it is decided. We will prepare a gift not of wood alone, but of blessing. Tomorrow we will go to the settler's home. The boy will see that kindness returns to him as the river returns to the sea." A hush fell over the camp. The decision was made. Tomorrow would carry a message, not just between two children, but between two peoples. As the fire burned lower, families drifted to their lodges, whispering the story into the ears of their children. And long after the camp had quieted, Little Hawk lay awake, clutching the wooden horse, dreaming of the settler boy who had given it to him. The prairie morning broke with a pale gold light spilling across the horizon. Dew clung to the blades of grass, glistening like tiny jewels as the sun climbed slowly. Birds called from the cottonwoods, their songs sharp and sweet in the cool air. Inside the small cabin, Samuel stirred awake, his tousled hair sticking in all directions. He rubbed his eyes, blinking against the sunlight streaming through the cracks in the shutters. Unlike most mornings, he reached instinctively for the wooden horse at his bedside, and found nothing. His small hand touched only rough blanket. Then he remembered with a jolt. Thunder now belonged to his new friend, Little Hawk. For a heartbeat, sadness flickered across his face, but it vanished almost as quickly. A smile replaced it. Samuel whispered to himself, "I hope he's playing with him now." In the kitchen, Mary busied herself with breakfast. Bread warmed over the fire, beans simmering in a pot. The smell filled the cabin. Thomas, already awake for hours, sat sharpening his knife at the table, each stroke slow and deliberate. He hadn't said much since the night before. His mind was still restless with worry. "Pa?" Samuel padded in, barefoot, his voice still soft with sleep. "Can I go outside after breakfast? Maybe my friend will come back today?" Thomas's hand paused mid-stroke, the blade glinting in the light. He exchanged a look with Mary, who gave him a pointed glance that urged patience. Thomas grunted. "Eat first." That was all he said. Outside, the day was unusually still. No wind, no rustle of grass. It was the kind of stillness that seemed to wait for something. And soon, the waiting ended. From the east, along the edge of the prairie, figures began to appear. At first, they were distant shapes against the morning light. But as they drew closer, Thomas's eyes narrowed. He set his knife down with a thud, rising to his feet. His hand brushed the rifle propped against the wall. Mary moved quickly to the window, her breath catching. A group of native elders, dressed in robes of deerskin and adorned with feathers, walked steadily toward the cabin. Their steps were measured, deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. They carried no weapons in their hands, yet the sight of them sent Thomas's heart into a hammering rhythm. "Mary," he muttered, his voice low, "get Samuel inside." But Samuel had already darted to the window, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes widened with delight. "Pa, it's them! Maybe my friend's coming too!" Thomas's jaw tightened. To him, this was no children's game. A group of elders approaching the homestead was no small matter. He pictured demands, accusations, maybe worse. The air grew heavy in his chest. The elders came to a stop a short distance from the porch. Gray Elk stood at the front, tall and commanding even in his years. Beside him, Red Willow leaned gently on her staff, her gaze calm, but piercing. Broken, Spear remained silent, his face unreadable, though his dark eyes missed nothing. For a long moment, the two worlds stared at each other. The settlers on the porch, the elders in the yard. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Samuel, restless with excitement, broke it. He pushed open the cabin door before. His father could stop him and ran forward, his small feet thudding against the packed dirt. "Hi!" he called out, his voice bright as birdsong. He waved, smiling without fear. Thomas's heart leapt into his throat. He strode quickly after his son, his hand hovering near his rifle, though he didn't raise it. "Samuel, get back here," he hissed. But Samuel only grinned up at the elders, his face shining with innocence. "Did you come to play? Is Little Hawk here?" The elders exchanged a glance, and then Gray Elk stepped forward. His voice was deep, steady, carrying both the weight of his years and the warmth of his heart. "We came for you, little one." His English was careful, accented but clear enough to be understood. Thomas stiffened. His hand curled tightly around Samuel's shoulder as though to anchor him. "What do you mean by that?" he demanded, his tone sharper than he intended. Gray Elk's eyes met his, unflinching. "Peace," he said simply. Then he turned his gaze back to Samuel, his lined face softening. "The boy gave a gift. Today, we return it." At his signal, Red Willow stepped forward, cradling something wrapped carefully in deerskin. She held it as though it were sacred, her eyes never leaving Samuel's. The bundle was small, but there was reverence in the way she carried it. Samuel's eyes grew wide. He looked up at his father, tugging at his hand. "Pa, they brought me something." Thomas's throat tightened. Every instinct told him to stay cautious, to keep distance, to mistrust. Yet another part of him, the part buried deep beneath years of suspicion, urged him to let the moment unfold. The morning air hung still, the prairie holding its breath. The boy had given his horse in innocence. Now the elders had come to answer. The air was so still that morning that even the cottonwoods seemed to hold their breath. Samuel stood in front of the elders, his small hand tugging gently at his father's calloused fingers. The deerskin bundle glowed faintly in the rising. Sunlight held with reverence in Red Willow's arms. Thomas's shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched as he tried to read the moment. Every instinct told him to remain wary, to guard his son. Yet he could not ignore the quiet dignity in the elders' posture. They had not come with weapons, nor anger, nor demands. They had come with ceremony. Red Willow stepped forward slowly, her staff tapping the earth with each measured step. She lowered herself before Samuel, her knees bending carefully despite her years, until she was eye to eye with the little boy. Her dark eyes softened, crinkling at the edges as she looked upon him not as a settler's child, but as a child of the earth. She spoke, her words careful and deliberate. You gave from your heart. Such gifts are rare." Her voice was low, but carried a melody as though it were woven into the breeze. "The Spirit saw you. We saw you. Today we return your kindness." Samuel's eyes shone with wonder. He tilted his head, his small lips parting in awe as Red Willow placed the bundle gently in his hands. The deerskin felt warm against his palms, soft but weighty, as though it carried more than just an object. "Open it, little one," she urged, her smile deepening. Samuel knelt down in the dirt, the way children do when curiosity overwhelms them. He pulled at the leather ties with clumsy fingers until the wrappings fell away. What lay inside made the world around him seem to glow brighter. It was a horse, but unlike the simple carving his grandfather had once given him, this one was exquisite. Carved from sacred cedar, its form was smooth and strong, every line shaped with the hands of a master craftsman. Its mane had been decorated with tiny feathers, its tail tied with colorful beads that shimmered in the light. Across its flank, patterns had been etched, swirls and symbols, marks of blessing from the tribe's most skilled artisans. Samuel gasped. His small hands trembled as he lifted it, holding it to his chest with the same reverence Little Hawk had shown the day before. "It's beautiful," he whispered, his voice barely carrying. Gray Elk stepped forward then, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the boy. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "This horse is not only a toy, it carries the spirit of friendship. It carries our people's blessing. Wherever it rests, may peace rest also." Samuel looked up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. He didn't fully understand the words, but he felt them, heavy, important, and kind. Thomas, standing above his son, felt his throat tighten. He had expected hostility. He had feared confrontation, yet here, before his eyes, the elders had honored his child with a gift more intricate than anything he had ever seen. And not just a gift of wood, but of meaning. A recognition of innocence, of kindness, of hope. Mary, standing on the porch with her apron still in her hands, pressed them to her mouth to stifle a sob. Tears pricked her eyes as she watched her son cradle the sacred carving. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Oh, Samuel, you've changed something today." Red Willow touched Samuel's shoulder gently. "When you gave your horse to our boy, you showed that friendship can begin without fear. This," she gestured to the carved cedar horse, "is our promise. A promise that we see your heart, and we honor it." Samuel hugged the horse tighter, his small voice piping with sincerity. "Thank you." It was simple, but it rang true, and in that moment, even the elders seemed moved. Broken Spear, who rarely spoke, allowed a faint smile to crease his weathered face. He murmured, almost to himself, "The smallest hands can carry the greatest truths." For a long while, no one moved. The prairie itself seemed hushed, as if listening to the ceremony. The only sounds were the distant calls of meadowlarks and the gentle crackle of the elders' beadwork in the sun. Then Gray Elk turned to Thomas. His gaze was firm, unflinching, but not hostile. "Your son has shown us that peace is not only in treaties or words of men. It is in the heart of a child. We honor him, and we honor you for raising him so." Thomas swallowed hard, his chest tightening. For the first time in years, he found himself unable to speak. Instead, he nodded stiffly, though inside, something shifted, the beginnings of a crack in the wall of suspicion he had built. Samuel, unaware of the heaviness in the air, simply beamed. He lifted the cedar horse high, the beads catching the sunlight, sending flashes of color across the yard. "Look, Pa!" he shouted with joy. "They gave me Thunder's brother." The elders smiled, their hearts lightened by his laughter. In that moment, the ceremony was complete. What had begun as a boy's small act of kindness had grown into something sacred, a bond sealed with blessing, witnessed by earth and sky alike. The carved cedar horse gleamed in Samuel's hands, as though it held the very light of the prairie sun. Beads shimmered like drops of rain, and feathers stirred with the faint breeze. To him it was more than a gift. It was proof that kindness mattered, that even a boy's simple gesture could ripple into something extraordinary. Samuel clutched it to his chest, eyes shining. "Pa," he said breathlessly, "it feels alive, like it can really run." His voice trembled with the thrill only children know, that wild blend of wonder and belief. Thomas crouched beside him, resting one steadying hand on his son's shoulder. His weathered eyes scanned the delicate carvings, the sacred patterns etched deep into the cedar. This was no mere toy. It was a treasure, born of hours of devotion, crafted with meaning his own hands could never replicate. He whispered under, his breath more to himself than to Samuel, "They gave this to you." His mind swirled with confusion and awe. Why would they give so freely? Why to his son? Settlers and natives were too often divided by fear and bloodshed. And yet, here, was a gesture of trust so pure it cut through the silence like a blade. Samuel didn't notice his father's turmoil. His little feet shifted in the dirt, and he pranced the cedar horse in front of him, making galloping sounds. "This one's Thunder's brother, Pa. I'm gonna call him Lightning." His laughter rang like silver bells, lifting the tension that had hung heavy in the yard. Mary came down from the porch, her skirts brushing against the earth. She knelt beside Samuel, smoothing a stray curl from his forehead. Her eyes glistened as she looked at the cedar horse. "It's beautiful," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Then to her son, "You must take great care of it, Samuel. It isn't just a toy, it's a promise." Samuel nodded seriously, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "I'll keep it safe, Mama, I promise." The elders watched quietly, their faces serene but their eyes sharp, gauging the settler's reaction, weighing whether the gesture had been received in the spirit it was given. Gray Elk finally spoke, his voice as deep and steady as the earth itself. "This gift binds us. A boy's kindness has opened a door that anger and weapons could not." He looked squarely at Thomas. "You fear us, and we fear you. But a child saw past that. Will you honor what he has done?" The question struck Thomas like an arrow. He felt the weight of the gaze upon him, from the elders, from his wife, even from his son. For years he had carried suspicion like a shield, always expecting the worst. But now, standing before these people who had entrusted his boy with something sacred, that shield felt heavier than ever. His throat tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he placed his hand over Samuel's, steadying the little horse. His voice was low, rough as gravel. "My son gave freely. You answered with honor. For that, I thank you." It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't the speech of a diplomat. But for Thomas, it was monumental. A first crack in the wall he had built around himself. The elders nodded. Broken Spear's eyes softened, and Red Willow's lips curled into a faint smile. The ceremony had achieved what it set out to do. Samuel, oblivious to the gravity, was lost in joy. He ran across the yard, making his cedar horse gallop, leaping over stones and tufts of grass. "Lightning's fast, Mama. He can race the wind." His laughter carried into the fields, mingling with the calls of meadowlarks. Mary leaned into Thomas, her voice trembling but firm. "Do you see it now? Samuel's gift didn't just touch them. It's touching you too." Thomas's jaw worked as he tried to hold back the flood of emotion. He glanced at his son, darting and spinning, with pure innocence, and for the first time in years, his chest loosened. He saw not just a boy playing, but a bridge being built, the elders prepared to leave, their work for the day complete. Red Willow raised her staff, signaling the end of the ceremony. "This bond will grow," she said, "so long as it is, tended like a fire. Small flames, if cared for, can light the darkest night." Gray Elk gave Samuel one last nod. "Take care of Lightning. He now carries more than play. He carries hope." Samuel stopped running, hugging the horse tightly once again. "I will. I promise." His small voice rang with conviction, simple, yet true. The elders departed with slow, measured steps, their figures shrinking against the horizon. Silence settled over the yard, broken only by the sound of Samuel's soft humming as he brushed the carved horse with his fingers, as if tending to a living creature. Thomas stood rooted in place, watching them go. A swirl of emotions battled. Within him, suspicion, gratitude, pride, and fear of what might still come. Yet underneath it all, something new had taken root, the faint, fragile stirrings of trust. The prairie stretched endlessly before Thomas, golden waves of grass bending in the afternoon wind. Yet for all its beauty, he barely saw it. His eyes were fixed on his son, who sat cross-legged in the dirt, humming softly as he polished the cedar horse with his sleeve. Lightning, Samuel called it. A name so innocent, so full of childish wonder, but Thomas could not stop thinking of the weight it carried. That horse was no ordinary trinket. It was a symbol, an offering, a bridge. And bridges, he knew, could be burned just as quickly as they were built. He leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, his weathered hat pulled low over his brow. The creak of the wood beneath his boots was the only sound besides Samuel's humming. Mary had gone inside to prepare supper, but before leaving, she had looked at him with that knowing gaze, the one that said, "This isn't just about Samuel. This is about you." Her words from earlier lingered in his mind. Samuel's gift didn't just touch them. It's touching you, too. He wanted to deny it, to push it aside, but the truth was unavoidable. Something inside him was shifting. Thomas had lived his life by hard rules. Trust no one, protect your family, build fences high and keep the world out. Those rules had kept him alive through droughts, bandits, and nights when distant gunfire told stories of feuds he wanted no part in. But now, watching Samuel cradle the carved horse as though it were alive, Thomas felt those rules begin to crumble. Boy's kindness had done what years of cautious living could not. It had pierced the divide. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. Samuel, without hesitation, handing over his little toy horse. A thing of no great value, yet filled with meaning because it was his. And the native boy's face, the joy, the gratitude. Then the elders, returning with their gift, humbling themselves before a child. Thomas swallowed hard. It was as though the earth itself had shifted under his boots. He thought of Gray Elk's words. A boy's kindness has opened a door that anger and weapons could not. Thomas had seen doors slammed his whole life. Some slammed by poverty, some by cruelty, and many by fear. But his son, barely 4 years old, had opened one without even realizing it. The irony stung. Here he was, a grown man, weathered by years of toil and hardship, and it was a child who had shown him what strength really looked like. Not the strength of walls or rifles, but the strength of an open hand. Samuel looked up from his play, cheeks flushed with joy. "Pa, look! Lightning jumps over mountains!" He bounced the carved horse over a row of stones, his laughter ringing across the yard. Thomas felt his chest tighten. That laugh, pure, unguarded, was what he wanted to protect most in this world. And yet, Hadn't he been the one shutting Samuel off from the world, teaching him to fear instead of to trust? He shifted uncomfortably, gripping the porch post as though it might steady him. His mind returned to Mary's steady voice. "It's touching you, too." She was right. He couldn't deny it any longer. The elder's gift wasn't just a reward for Samuel. It was a challenge to him, to let go of the old fear, to see possibility where he had only seen danger. The prairie wind swept through, carrying with it the faint echo of the elder's parting words. "Small flames, if cared for, can light the darkest night." Thomas closed his eyes. He remembered nights sitting by the fire, his rifle across his lap, staring into the flames as shadows danced on the walls. Fear had been his companion, whispering, that danger lurked just beyond the light. But now, for the first time, he wondered, what if the fire was meant for more than defense? What if it was meant to welcome, to warm, to connect? Samuel's laughter broke his thoughts again. The boy was still running, cedar horse held high, as if daring the sky itself to catch him. Thomas pushed himself off the post and stepped into the yard. His boots crunched on dry earth. Samuel noticed and ran to him, holding up the horse proudly. "Pa! Did you see? Lightning's faster than thunder! He can race the wind!" Thomas knelt down, his knees aching from years of labor. He took Samuel's, small hands in his own, feeling the smooth cedar against his calloused palms. His voice was quiet, almost hoarse. "You did a good thing, son. A better thing than most men ever do in their whole lives." Samuel blinked, not fully understanding, but he beamed at the praise. "I just wanted him to smile, Pa." Thomas felt something break inside him, not in pain, but in release. Tears welled in his eyes, though he tried to blink them away. His son hadn't thought about fences or fear or danger. He'd just thought about kindness. And in that moment, Thomas realized that perhaps he had been wrong all along. Perhaps strength wasn't in the walls he built, but in the bridges his son had just begun to create. He drew Samuel into his arms, holding him tight, the cedar horse pressed between them. His voice was a whisper, carried away by the prairie wind. "You're teaching me, boy. You're teaching me." For the first time in many years, Thomas felt something stir deep in his chest. Not fear, not suspicion, but hope. The seasons turned slowly on the prairie, yet the memory of one afternoon, a boy handing over his little toy horse, refused to fade. Weeks passed, and the carved cedar horse remained Samuel's most treasured possession. Not because of its beauty or the way it gleamed in the sunlight, but because of what it meant. To him, it was a friend, a reminder that kindness could travel farther than fences and faster than fear. To his father, Thomas, the horse was something more, a constant reminder of the day a child's small act had opened a door between two worlds. Word spread quietly through the settlement. Some scoffed at the tale. "It's just a child's toy," they said, but others whispered with awe about how the elders had honored a 4-year-old boy, offering him a gift carved by their own hands. Even among hardened settlers, suspicion began to soften. The native families, too, carried the story. Around their fires, elders told the tale of the little boy who gave without hesitation. They spoke of the toy horse that bridged a gap years of conflict had only widened. To them, it was proof that peace could begin in the unlikeliest of places, in the hands of a child. Thomas noticed changes in himself as well. He no longer avoided the trails where the native families walked. When he crossed paths with them, instead of looking away, he gave a nod. At first, it was stiff, awkward, but slowly, it became genuine. He was learning step by step to let go of fear. One evening, as the sky burned crimson with sunset, Gray Elk returned. His presence was quiet, yet commanding, the kind that filled the space without a word. He came not with warriors, but alone, walking steadily toward the homestead. Samuel spotted him first. "Pa! The elder!" he shouted, racing down the path with lightning in hand. He thrust the carved horse up for Gray Elk to see, pride in his small voice. "Look! He still runs fast!" Gray Elk chuckled, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. His weathered hands reached out, brushing lightly across the polished wood. "Lightning carries your spirit well, little one," he said. Thomas approached slowly, uncertain. The instinct to guard, to protect, still tugged at him. But something in Gray Elk's calm eyes steadied him. The elder spoke softly. "Your son's gift opened a path. A small path, but one that can grow if we walk it together." Thomas swallowed, the words catching in his throat. For years, he had believed paths like that were impossible, yet here stood the proof. Carved in cedar, held in the hands of a child. He nodded once, firm. "Maybe it's time we tried." It was not a treaty, not a handshake in front of crowds, not the ending of all fears. But it was a beginning. And beginnings mattered. Over the months that followed, a quiet friendship grew. The settlers and natives still lived apart, but there were fewer hostile stares, fewer muttered warnings. Instead, there were cautious greetings, shared hunts, even the occasional trade of goods. And at the center of it all was a boy no older than 4, whose laughter seemed to carry farther than any rifle shot. Years later, when Samuel was old enough to ride real horses, Lightning, the cedar carving, still sat on his shelf. Its edges were worn smooth, not from neglect, but from being handled again and again, cherished through childhood and into manhood. By then, the story of the toy horse had grown into something larger than the act itself. Children in both the settlement and the native camp knew the tale by heart. They repeated it around fires and beneath starlit skies, voices filled with wonder. They called it the gift of the little rider. And though Samuel sometimes blushed when he heard it, he carried the weight of the story with quiet pride. For Thomas, the story became his anchor in old age. Whenever doubt returned, whenever suspicion tried to claw back into his heart, he would look at Lightning on the shelf and remember the lesson his son had taught him without even trying. "Strength isn't in the fences we build," he would remind himself, "but in the bridges we dare to cross." And so it was that one small act of kindness, the giving of a toy horse, left a legacy greater than Samuel could ever have imagined. It softened hardened hearts. It taught a father the meaning of hope. It wove 2 communities together, not with treaties or promises, but with the laughter of children who played without knowing they were supposed to be enemies. The prairie rolled on, wild and unyielding, but in its vastness, a single thread of peace had been sown. A flame had been lit, carried by the hands of a child, bright enough to shine for generations.